Have you ever felt there's an invisible barrier between you and most people? Sometimes you seem distant, almost unapproachable, and outsiders often label this as coldness or arrogance. But what's truly happening is something much deeper and psychologically sophisticated. The detachment of intelligent minds doesn't stem from fear or social trauma, but from a conscious choice to preserve one's mental integrity. Carl Jung understood that intelligence, especially psychological intelligence, creates a natural gravitational pull towards solitude. Where others see loneliness and abandonment, you find clarity and freedom. It's a protective mechanism to prevent your mind from being contaminated by the constant noise of the world. This leads us to the first major sign, the perception of the social theater. As your intelligence and awareness grow, you begin to realize that the vast majority of human interactions are nothing more than a performance. You notice that people are constantly acting in search of validation, status, or simply to fill unconscious deficiencies. Schopenhauer argued that people gather in crowds because they are terrified of being alone with their own thoughts. They talk about pleasantries and repeat ready-made opinions just to escape the silence that reveals inner emptiness. For you, participating in this is like watching a play where all the actors have forgotten they're following a script. You realize that people aren't seeing who you are, but rather what they need you to be. They don't love your essence. They love the projection they've created of you to satisfy their needs. Faced with this realization, you reach a crossroads. Either you continue playing these empty social games that seem increasingly artificial, or you decide to step back. The intelligent person chooses detachment out of wisdom, understanding that their peace is worth far more than acceptance based on a lie. The second sign that you are operating at a higher frequency is what the avatar calls the vision of the gears. For most people, reality is what happens on the surface, but for an intelligent mind, intelligence brings the unexpected burden of noticing patterns that others completely ignore. You don't just hear what someone says. You perceive the unconscious motivations behind every word and the fear-based behaviors that masquerade as love or trust. Carl Jung defined this as the development of psychological consciousness, the ability to observe the hidden mechanics of the human mind. Having this multi-layered perception, which simultaneously analyzes psychological dynamics, logical flaws, and unconscious biases, creates a peculiar form of isolation. You feel like a spectator in a theater, seeing the script and the strings that move the actors, while everyone around you believes they are living real life. Since your mind cannot turn off these analytical functions, you end up in an internal exile. You are physically present but psychologically distant, because you see implications and connections that others don't even suspect. This acute awareness leads us directly to the third sign, your emotional energy economy. You understand that your attention and psychological energy are finite resources that need to be invested strategically, not wasted. Jung understood that maintaining consciousness requires a high energy expenditure. Therefore, every social interaction undergoes a silent cost-benefit analysis. Will this relationship nourish my growth or merely drain my reserves to repeat empty patterns? This isn't coldness, but emotional intelligence applied to relationship management. While others spread their attention across dozens of superficial connections, you seek impact and depth. You prefer to have a single deep connection over 10 interactions that offer no real reciprocity. You have developed what the avatar calls emotional sovereignty, the ability to observe your emotions without being controlled by them, withdrawing from others' dramas to preserve your mental clarity and well-being. The fourth sign that explains why your intelligence pushes you away from the masses is what the avatar defines as the translation fatigue. For a mind that processes reality through multiple layers, simultaneously analyzing historical patterns, logical flaws and psychological dynamics, most social interaction requires a monumental effort of simplification. You find yourself constantly forced to convert complex thoughts and profound insights into small, digestible fragments just to maintain group harmony or to avoid being seen as strange. This perpetual process of toning down your intelligence to avoid causing discomfort generates deep mental exhaustion and a feeling of internal division. You begin to feel like you are living a double life. Your authentic self, which teems with brilliant connections and ideas, and your social self, which needs to accept the basics to avoid exclusion. Over time, you realize that it is far less draining to remain in the silence of your own company than to carry the burden of translating your soul for those who have no interest in moving beyond the surface. This leads us directly to the fifth sign, the dread of mediocrity. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer was unsparing in stating that most social gatherings arise from pure boredom and the visceral fear people have of being alone with their own thoughts. They gather not because they have something of value to share, but because they need external noise to drown out their own emptiness. For you, being forced to listen to conversations about nothing, trivial gossip, or futile office dramas is a true form of psychological torture. It's like listening to the same scratched record with the same repetitive opinions over and over again. The avatar understands that your disinterest in parties or events designed for the lowest common denominator is not arrogance. It is a need for self-preservation. Once you have experienced the depth of a rich and contemplative mental life, social trivialities cease to be entertainment and become a noisy and irritating distraction from what truly matters. The sixth sign that defines your trajectory is the understanding that solitude is not a burden, but your greatest source of sovereignty and freedom. While most people feel a visceral fear of being alone, using parties, trivial conversations, and the constant noise of social media to drown out their own emptiness, you have learned to find what Carl Jung called the treasure in the depths. For the intelligent person, solitude is not an absence of company, but rather a full presence of oneself. It is in this chosen isolation that your mind can finally operate at its natural frequency, without the constant pressure of needing to translate, simplify, or adjust itself to be understood by others. Schopenhauer was categorical in stating that a man can only truly be himself when he is alone. When in a crowd, you are often forced to perform, to wear a social mask, and to mold yourself to others' expectations just to maintain peace or be accepted. But in solitude, this performance drops away. You stop being what others need you to be and become who you truly are in essence. The avatar observes that while most people use relationships as a way to escape themselves and their own boredom, the intelligent person uses detachment as a tool to find, process, and strengthen themselves. This ability to enjoy one's own company without feeling deprived of anything is what we call the advantage of solitude. You can spend long periods with little social contact and, contrary to what the world thinks, you don't emerge from these moments broken or lonely, but rather with more clarity, creativity, and psychological integration. For you, silence is not empty. It is the sacred space where the deepest ideas and solutions to the most complex problems finally find their voice. Those who depend on external noise and constant validation to feel alive end up with a weak and dependent inner world. You, on the other hand, by cultivating a rich and dense mental life, become self-sufficient and free from the exhausting need for others' approval. Understanding this detachment is not about isolating yourself from the world out of fear, but about what Carl Jung called individuation, the heroic journey to become who you truly are, stripped of the projections, expectations, and emotional demands of the masses. The avatar understands that, for an intelligent mind, detachment is not a sign of isolation or coldness, but rather a vital process of psychological integration. It is the necessary space to organize your own thoughts and become whole before attempting any genuine connection with the world. The great irony that many don't realize is that most people form relationships as an escape route from themselves, using social noise as an anesthetic for their own emptiness. Intelligent people, however, take the opposite path. They often withdraw from relationships precisely to find themselves. This is the treasure in the depths that Jung described, the richness that only emerges in genuine solitude, where your mind can operate at its natural frequency without the exhaustive need to translate, filter, or accommodate anyone's cognitive style. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer suggested that, although complete isolation can be dangerous, the secret to wisdom is balance, engaging with society only on your own terms. You should learn to socialize when the encounter is deep and brings real meaning, but have the courage to withdraw when you realize that the interaction is merely a repetition of mediocre and empty patterns. Don't apologize for treating your emotional energy as a finite resource that must be invested strategically. Your detachment is not a mistake to be corrected. It is the psychological architecture necessary for your mental well-being and for the protection of your truth in a world that often operates at much more primitive levels. The detachment necessary for this self-exploration is not a withdrawal from life, but rather a much deeper and more honest engagement with it. The challenge is not to learn to be more social to please others, but rather to honor your natural rhythms while remaining open to connections that truly enhance your psychological resources. If you felt seen in this content and understand that your journey is about quality, not quantity, leave your diamond in the comments. This shows that you are part of the conscious minority that stopped performing to truly start existing. To seal this commitment to your mental sovereignty, write our definitive password: My solitude is my power. Subscribe to the network to continue awakening the avatar within you. Remember, the true mission is not to be accepted by the crowd, but to live so authentically that your clarity illuminates the path for others, even in the most absolute silence. See you in the next video.